Okay. All right, everyone. Thanks for having us. My name is Dale Storie. I'm the Associate Dean Research at the Dr. John Archer Library and Archives at the University of Regina. And with me is my colleague.
Hi, I'm Orland Hoeber. I'm a professor of interactive information retrieval, a department head in the Department of Computer Science, and co-founder and chief scientist of a company called Dialect Search.
All right. And so we're here to talk about actually what's now a over 5-year-long collaboration between the Archer Library and Dr. Haber, and some of the projects that have come out of that. And it's yeah, we'll jump right into things. I'm going to start with well, first of all, just say that while I was preparing part of this presentation, I got hooked on the Bing image generator that came out, and I've never been a fan of picking out stock photos for my presentations, and I decided to go the AI route. So I apologize in advance because I probably used about 40 liters of water and electricity using this, but in Bing Image Generator is based on DALL-E. It's just the Microsoft version of it, and it did allow me to kind of type in a concept that I was thinking of and have something interesting spit out. So yeah, there are some interesting ones, some more tame ones, but I'll start off by, and I'll just mention one more thing. The URLs are at the bottom for the Bing images, Bing generated images. One of the nice things is you can just copy and paste the URL. So because the slides are made available, you can go click and see what the prompt was for each one as well. So, all right. Okay, so here's our first image. Um, So I wanted to actually illustrate the fact that a brief history of library search, and it's only going back to the card catalog. Of course, there's technologies before that, but just how it's gone from being a very mystic and arcane experience to being something that's very accessible in the terms of low barrier and, type in a few keywords. So these successive generations of technologies have led us to the point we're at currently. And a lot of the discussion for the last say 20 years has been around the kind of discovery search, web scale discovery, and this is what there's been plenty of presentations about that at this conference. So when we go back to say 15, 20 years ago, we talk about why do we need discovery search, and the reason was Google came out, everyone was like, oh wow, look at this, it's so simple and easy to use. All of our students wanted something. So it first of all had that there was the user demand for like the simple Google search. So with relevancy ranking and simple keyword searching. For libraries too, we had a proliferation of silos at that point. We libraries wanted a single point of access. Students certainly wanted a single point of access because they liked the idea of being able to search Google and find everything, or at least going to a one-stop shop, as it were. I think along the way, discovery search with this generation of systems and things like that has the other benefits has been improved analytics, the software as a service model for the commercial providers, and then mobile friendly interfaces as well. But what we have now in 2020, I'm apologies. All right, getting used to the clicker. What we have now in 2023 is a rather mature landscape. There's several commercial products that are broadly adopted. We've got some open source products out there as well. Throughout a lot of the 2010s, there was a lot of bespoke development and custom integrations and things where open source is combined with commercial indexes, where there's custom development on top of commercial products, things like that. So I've put up a few examples from literature. Certainly the most well-known one, which is on the next slide, is the design motif of the bento box, and which came out of NCSU. That was the first reference I could find for it anyways, but has been adopted at a number of places, and it kind of solved the problem of different resource types. The silos being combined could sometimes be a bit messy, and so that split them apart there. But and interestingly, I'm just talking from we're an Alma Primo site, so I can only speak really in depth from that experience. But there hasn't been a lot of bento box brought into the commercial interfaces, as far as I can tell. It's been largely a custom development thing. So So I wanted to preface this by saying this is kind of the tradition of libraries, because what we're talking about is kind of two traditions that are certainly parallel, and I think with our research partnership, we brought them together a bit. So just to give you a bit of the U of R context, um, there we go. Um, so Archer Library migrated from Voyager Summon to Alma Primo in May 2017. Thankfully, I was not there for it. I arrived in 2018. Uh, it was we were on Voyager for roughly 20 years. I do know that. By the time I got there, user feedback, we had collected a fair bit of anecdotal feedback, and it was generally positive. I think by that point, people had made the adjustment to the new search interface. One of the things that kept on popping up was this inability to distinguish between formats, such as books. So when I arrived, there was kind of talking about, oh, should we be trying to do a bento interface? A lot of talk about alternate search interfaces, certainly from the library leadership team, which would include me. There was interest in leveraging the system in new and creative ways. Certainly, Alma has a pretty uh, solid suite of APIs, and there's the developer blog that Ex Libris maintains, and so there's lots of examples out there. I think where we got into some interesting discussions was around resourcing of it. It's not surprising. Um, so the challenges were around the capacity, both in-house and also funding to pursue any sort of bespoke development. The culture at the U of R at the time is still a little bit less today. It was there was limited interest not only from within the library but also on campus to pursue anything other than really turnkey solutions. So buy a vendor product, put it in, call it a day kind of thing. And an organizational culture that was focused on the practical and not willing to. My colleague used to use this phrase a lot. I don't know whether he invented it or what, but bleed on the bleeding edge, as it were. A lot of when I would suggest something, it was often the answer that, well, we wait for other people to do it, and then we might consider doing it. So, um, because that way there is no risk, there is no bleeding, as it were. And I was in a new role. I was excited to kind of make some things happen, and as in my position. I also had to recognize that we were a very, very small team of, I think there were only four technical like IT staff within the library. And they were also recovering from the migration, which I underestimated at the time. It was but having not gone through it, I guess, but it got me thinking like, okay, well, I don't want to be putting more work on these people. This is not if we're talking about these sorts of things, it's not a simple undertaking. I'd been in organizations before where they had pursued the custom search interface option. It's a lot of work, but it did get me thinking more about organizational innovation, as it were. So I'll just mention the Bing image here too is actually an abstract image of organizational innovation. So, all right, and that's where I started thinking about this, which I'd been thinking about for years. But who here is familiar with the concept of a skunk works? Okay, um, this is a happy AI image of the picture I had in my head several years ago about what a skunk works was. Um, it was actually the I'd heard the concept before, but it was actually this article by Bethany Novisky from about 10 years ago, where she was talking about scholarly R&D in the library. And so this is her definition. A skunkworks is a small and nimble technical team, deliberately, self-consciously, and yes, quite unfreely freed from much of the surrounding bureaucracy of the larger organization in which it locates itself. So the term originates from Lockheed Martin in the 1940s, which it's funny to take something from a military aviation contractor and apply to academic libraries, but that kind of works in theory. Novisky uses it specifically in the concept of digital humanities centers doing scholarly research and development. And it's the idea that the skunk works is focused on ideation, and prototyping without a clear path to production. So they work on their own. They're kind of isolated from the day-to-day maintenance and ongoing operations, bureaucracy, but the ideas that come out of there get fed back into the main organization. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss that slide? Yes. Okay, I forgot to move. Anyways, that's the definition right there. So, and that brings us into the partnership with Orland and computer science. So there, I'm going to switch it over to Orland right away. I just wanted to mention that we met at a big data event on campus in 2018, not long after I arrived, but we got talking, and because he is information science adjacent, I guess. And I noticed that when he was telling me about the work his graduate students were working on in terms of prototyping and running user studies to test ideas, it seemed I was quite intrigued by that. Orland, you mentioned this for our presentation, but the difference between design-oriented research versus research-oriented design. And it got me thinking about how a lot of how libraries often do research-oriented design. We do an environmental scan of what's happening, and then we put that into a design problem. In terms of our partnership, the library provides REST API access to the Alma Sandbox search and underlying metadata, so the central discovery index of Alma, and that's to support the graduate research students' research projects. And so I'll turn it over to Orland to talk about some of those projects.
All right, so I'm the skunk in the skunk works, I guess. Maybe my grad students more so than me. So we'll stay on the same slide for a couple minutes. So I come from a computer science background. My style of research in computer science is a little bit different than what you might normally expect or see, because I'm coming from two different computer science subdisciplines: human-computer interaction, where we kind of design new ways of presenting information to users and really study that human behavior of using software, and also from an information retrieval perspective. And that kind of links in quite nicely with what a lot of things happen within digital library search domains. But a big part of it is in the last few years, I've really started leaning towards an information science perspective in this area of human computer interaction and information retrieval. And what I mean by that is really thinking carefully about the human behavior of searching. A lot of times when we design any kind of interface, we forget about the fact that people need to use it, and people have behaviors that are either learned or kind of innate, and we have to kind of think a little bit about that in the design process. So Dale mentioned a little bit about this kind of design-oriented research versus research-oriented design, and the real kind of indicator of that is, what's the last word? When you're doing research-oriented design, you're doing R&D. That's what we typically think of as R&D, and the outcome is the design of something, and the research is just for the purposes of doing the problem solving to get to the point where you can create the design. But from an academic research perspective, especially when we're working in the domain of human-computer interaction and trying to design things for people, we do the design work for the purposes of doing the research, where the outcome is learning more about how people do things. And in the context of this area of research, how people search, how can we enable them to search better? And I want to highlight the fact that what I'm really talking about here is searching when it's not an easy thing to do. And so we have, there's this common kind of expectation that because Google is so successful, search is a solved problem. Everybody knows how to search. I think everybody knows how to look up information when they can articulate a query and when they can trust that the search engine will give them exactly what they want. But I think in a lot of academic domains, we have to do more for our students and for our researchers, because maybe they don't know what they're looking for. They don't have a really good understanding. So we get into this context of complex search. What makes something a complex search? Maybe it's ambiguous in nature. Maybe it's multifaceted. Maybe there's not a single document that can give you what you need. So you now need to kind of synthesize information from multiple documents. Maybe you can't finish your search in one session, and you have to come back and reacquaint yourself with what you were searching for previously, and then come back to that searching. So I've kind of rambled on a little bit in my own kind of self-introduction. I'm going to try to realign myself with where we are on the slides now. So maybe jump to the next one. And then if you can flip that too.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
All right. So, a typical approach to kind of dealing with search is when we know really what we're looking for, we're essentially doing a lookup search. And that's just kind of like simple kind of search activity that we can do. But really, we have to think about, what are we doing when we're designing search interfaces? A lot of times when we're designing search interfaces, we're really thinking of this simple lookup search as kind of our, I guess, our de facto way of thinking about searching. What we really should be thinking about is search from two different perspectives. One is, what is the data that's available to us to surface to the searcher? But the other side is what does the searcher need to do to actually perform their task? And so we have this kind of two directions of thinking about design: a data-driven this direction, and this kind of information, this user need side direction. And so this kind of brings us into thinking a little bit about the behaviors or the models of searching. So this lookup model of search is really kind of aligned with that. I know what I'm looking for. I can type my query in. I can grab the first couple search results and get out and be done. But quite commonly, we're finding that people are needing to do more complex searches, which means that they need to follow more complex information seeking models. So Bates just defined one of these models, way back in 1989, and she called it the berry picking model. And the whole idea, maybe some of you are familiar with the berry picking model, it's been around for quite some time. And the whole idea is that when we're searching, our understanding of what we're looking for changes in the process of searching. So this kind of breaks that model of lookup search. When we're looking up, we kind of assume we know what we're looking for, we grab what we want, and we're out. But as we're searching, our understanding of what we're looking for is changing. So we have this kind of dynamic model of searching. And my next query that I issue is informed by the previous information that I found. And then the next query that I issue is informed by the previous information I found. And I have this kind of journey through the information space as I'm trying to resolve my information need. Shortly thereafter, some people started to describe other models that were maybe a little less linear. So Vakari had described a multi-stage search model, and White and Roth described something called exploratory search. And these are both quite similar to one another. And the idea is that when we're starting to do a search on something we don't know much about, we have to explore, we have to find information, we have to develop our own kind of language or an understanding of the language that's been used in the authors of these resources, and then try to use that to help inform our search activity. So Vakari described the multi-stage model as having three stages: a pre-focus searching, where I'm trying to learn and explore what's there. And then once I know something about it, then I can transition into this focus searching, where I'm really digging in to the information that I'm looking for. And then, but saving things. And then ultimately, when I want to start using them, I do a post-focus type of activity where I'm organizing the information. And that kind of aligns nicely with this kind of exploratory search model, where we might start with an exploration style of searching, where I'm trying to, again, learn what's there, and then move into like a focus searching, where I'm trying to really find the information. The nice thing about White and Roth's model of information seeking and exploratory search is that they really acknowledge the fact that there's a changing level of understanding that's happening as we're searching, and it kind of goes up and down. As we find something new, we have more certainty in what we're looking for, and then we find something that's really new and we don't know much about it, and then our certainty kind of goes down. So we have this kind of ebb and flow of our certainty. Ultimately, we wanted our certainty to get higher and higher, so that we actually really can dig into our search activity. So these models I've been using to kind of inform the style of research that we're doing. You can move. And so we want to go beyond this lookup search model, this kind of Google one-size-fits-all style of search interface, and move into something that maybe is more informed by the behaviors of people that are needing to do searches that are more complex. And again, these are the long-term searching that might happen within a university setting. So that's been our primary focus, is university setting. So most library interfaces emulate these web search paradigms with the goal of providing a low barrier to entry, and that's great. If I only need to go in and get something and get out, this low barrier to entry is really, really, really important. And these are well suited to these lookup style of search behaviors. And the problem is that when somebody moves into a more complex information seeking situation, it becomes difficult for them, because they have to maintain a lot of information on their own. So it has a high cognitive load, and the use of technology is a little bit fractured. People start, let's say, saving things to documents, and keeping track of queries if in a separate document and things like that, or maybe they don't. And then they have to just kind of keep all these things in their own mind. So, when we have simple search interfaces, we promote a simple style of search. And if people need to do something that's more than that, it puts a lot of load on them. Um, so, and, tabs, how many people have like, more than 10 tabs open on their browser at any point in time? I see a lot of hands. And I'm imagining everybody's thinking 10, maybe 100. And so, tabs have become our default workspace. But tabs are hard to use because you can only see one thing at a time and you have to kind of remember where they are. And, so I often have like, 3 different browser windows open with 10 or 20 different tabs, kind of all kind of organized in different ways. And then my computer crashes, and no, it's a Mac, it doesn't crash. But let's say I do a software update, and then all of a sudden my tabs, I have to kind of go and like recreate my tab space. And so these are problems. People have created workarounds to technology deficiencies. And our ideas are, can we build better search interfaces so they don't have workarounds so much? So there have been some things built into kind of modern digital library systems that are trying to help out. But I'm going to criticize a few things. I think our ex Libris, where is he? Okay, you're still there. Okay, I'll try not to be too critical. Hi, you're right in the light, so I'll pretend like I'm being grilled now, and I'm on trial. So the feature of saving queries, fantastic. The problem is I have to remember to do it. And sometimes I don't know if this is a really, really important query for me to save until after the fact and it's gone. And then I have to kind of maybe come back. And so saving, great. Letting the user control the save, good. But what do we get? We get a list of queries all in one kind of collection and when we did it, and no other metadata. There is other metadata that's available, but it's not being surfaced here with a saved query. The ability to kind of add in a virtual bookshelf, again, fantastic. This is something we've been trying to do for a very long time. The idea of mimicking a library browsing activity within the digital realm, very, very appealing. As librarians, I'm sure you're all very familiar walking into a library, finding something that's really important and saying, let's see what else is here. There was some talk yesterday about this serendipitous discovery of information and how that's really, really important. Unfortunately, the need to interact with a virtual bookshelf kind of almost breaks that metaphor a little bit. If I have to click on the buttons to move back and forth, it's not the same as me in the library just scanning with my eyes. And so I think we've been trying to do this for at least 20 years now. But I don't think we've solved it yet. I think there's still some space to kind of deal with this kind of serendipitous discovery of things that are nearby within a virtual library. And then moving on to the faceted query refinement, again, very, very powerful tools. This is a really great example of something that actually got started in academic research back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And what's very striking to me is it took 10 or 15 years for this academic research to get pushed out into like products. And I'm not sure why that happens because, within the academic realm of designing and building kind of new ways of doing things, we come up with a lot of really great approaches, but then they just kind of sit in these kind of academic silos and they don't kind of get out very quickly. And so that's something I'm trying to break. I think, when we talk a lot about the impact of research through citations and things like that, I think the impact of research of somebody taking an idea that you developed as a researcher and implementing it into a product is way better because you're then taking these things that you're finding and getting it into the hands of people that need to use it. So that's a really important thing for me in my research domain and how I'm trying to do research. So I'm working with Dale and working with the Alma API. I've done a handful of projects with various different graduate students to various degrees of success. And so one of the early projects that we did, we started 2 projects almost simultaneously with 2 grad students. And one of those students, kind of ran into some technical problems with using the API and trying to match the data that they're seeing in the Primo interface, so the search interface, with the data in the API. And maybe we were just at this kind of weird time with how things were working, but we really had a lot of difficulties of matching things. We could see things in the interface, and then we'd look in the API, and we'd have a really hard time finding where that is. And so what I'm trying to do is highlight maybe some of the challenges of doing the things we want to do when we have access to data. Sometimes we have access to data, but we have to work really hard to find what we're looking for in that data. So we ended up so what we're trying to do in this particular project was see if there's ways that we can support these 3 stages of searching that Vicari had defined. So pre-focus searching, where we're trying to do some exploration, and then some focus searching, really diving in, and then some post-focus, having a workspace and saving the resources somehow. Ran into some technical difficulties. Ultimately, what we refocused this on doing the pre-focus searching and trying to find topical relationships between search results. And the idea is that if I can find a really good search result and I can identify other ones that are related through the topics, that can help me to kind of streamline my evaluation of the search results page. Maybe a slightly more successful project. We called it Clink Search. This is an approach where we wanted to, again, have a similar thing. Where we're trying to allow a searcher who finds something really, really interesting to use the effort that he put into finding that interesting thing to make it easier to find other more interesting things. And so we used a technique called visually linked keywords. So we surfaced the keywords of each search result out and allowed the user to interact with them and highlight the keywords that they thought were very interesting. And then this would highlight those associated keywords in other search results, and it would allow a kind of an easy skimming and scanning up and down. Again, this was happening at about the same time as that earlier project, and so we were having some API problems. Ultimately, we transitioned to using the IEEE Explorer digital library because it had an API, and then we discovered that the API only gave us access to the content, but not to the search interface, a ranked list of search results. And so we ended up having to do some screen scraping and a whole bunch of stuff like that. So it does get better. So, we did run into a few kind of hiccups here and there. Moving on to this third project, I think here's where as my team started to hit their stride in using the API provided by Ex Libris. And what we're really trying to focus on in this project is how can we support cross-session and cross-device searching? And this leads to kind of 2 problems that we were trying to tackle. So assuming a searcher is undertaking a complex search task, how can we help them to resume that task if they can't finish it in one session? Okay, so complex searches can't necessarily be done in one session. What can we do to help them when they get back to it? And then the second question that we were trying to answer is, assuming students are increasingly using their mobile devices for academic work, how can we allow them to have this searching that they're doing on their mobile device be available and accessible when they get back to their computer? I've seen many studies on people that when they use their mobile device and they find something, what do? They email it to themselves, they WhatsApp it to themselves so that it's then available on their computer. The technology exists to kind of keep track of that and move information between computers without using email. And so that was one of our goals. So what do we do in this particular system? We had a mobile first interface design. So we made sure that things worked on the mobile device first. And then when we moved onto the computer, we had this wealth of space that we could then take advantage of. We built in task management tools to allow a user to keep their different search interests distinct from one another. So as a student, maybe you're taking 4 or 5 classes. You don't want all that searching that you're doing all piled into the same area. We need to kind of have a way of allowing a student to kind of keep that information distinct from one another so that the work that they're doing on one class doesn't kind of infect the work that they're doing in another class. And then they have a hard time figuring out, how do I get back to searching? Is this the right thing I want to do? We centrally stored the information to allow the searching that's being done on one device to be available on any other device. And so this isn't just me on my mobile device and my computer, but maybe when I go into the lab or into the library, maybe my computer breaks and I need to go into the library to use a computer, I can log in, I still have access to all the work that I've been doing. And so that's a really important thing if we want to allow people to do searching that isn't just a single shot, one session search. And then we use visual representations of past search activities to allow that searcher to easily identify how successful have they been, where have they been finding information, and so on. And a little bit of visual keyword highlighting to help the searcher surface these relationships between search results. So this project was particularly successful due to the hard work of one grad student. So this was kind of a single grad student doing a project like this, and he was an excellent grad student. And we had this thought as we were doing things. So first of all, we wanted to publish the research because that's the currency of academia. So we published the demonstration of the work at the top conference that's at the intersection of information retrieval and human-computer interaction and information science. It's called CHEER. I think it's a very happy name for a conference. And then we ran some user studies, and the user studies are really important for us to kind of really see, can students really use these interface between multiple devices and really kind of engage in that resumption of the search activity. When we ran the user study, we had them do an initial search on their mobile device. And then 7 days later, we asked them to come back into the lab and continue that search on a desktop computer to see if that transition worked the way we expected it. And indeed, it did. The students found that were using this found it very valuable and useful in terms of getting back to their search activities. So we published a full paper at the top information retrieval conference in the world. We're very proud of that. And then we showed this to the librarians. I think in between we showed it to librarians. And right away, we had very positive feedback from our library partners saying, well, this is great. How can we kind of get this going? And that really kind of made me think back to that faceted browsing scenario where it took 10 or 15 years for the academic research on faceted browsing to get into things like libraries and online shopping. And I thought, well, what can we do to kind of fast track that? Well, what can we do? We start a company and we start, making sure that we can take research prototypes and deploy it into actual production software. And so, we spent, the last year or so taking these research ideas and turning it into this research prototype and turning it into like hardened software that's reliable, software that's secure, software that has ways of integrating with the single sign-on. And the nice thing about the Ex Libris API, so the Alma and the Primo, is that we can slot in, and we're not trying to replace the primary search interface when people are just trying to do lookup search, because that fast in and out of the quick search of Primo is excellent. The question is, can we do something different or better when people are doing these long-term searches? So our search interface kind of slots in within this existing infrastructure, not replacing it, but enhancing it. And so, this has really helped us to kind of move things forward and try to get some research out of the academic realm and into kind of the hands of the people that need it. We've deployed the software at the University of Regina as of this summer, and we already have quite a number of students and researchers using it and engaging with this particular approach with doing their long-term, force level research, body level research. So we have a screenshot of, yeah. And then I was going to do a live demo, but I think it's going to be tricky to do a live demo because I don't think I can do that on the computer here. So I'm happy to do live demos for anybody that wants them kind of over the lunch hour. And I'll pass things over to Dale. Yeah.
All right. So on to some lessons learned from this project. So I've really been reflecting a lot the last few years about how libraries are really focused on the path to production rather than prototyping in a lot of situations. And I'll say one key distinction there is the one that Novisky brought up, which is the Digital Humanities Digital Scholarship Center. So we've heard some presentations yesterday about kind of the challenges with maintaining those, and especially when they're more bespoke development. But for smaller shops like ours, it's really focused on keeping things running as much as we can. So there's not a lot of room for this for play, as it were. And for us, it means adhering to best practices. I still think of a lot of times about what our staff were saying in the early years, where it was we look at what other people are doing and then we do that well. So but it's not necessarily breaking new ground in the same way that I think we can in this sort of partnership. And so that's where this has been a really nice partnership, and I encourage others to work with find partners in the academy and in other places. I'm not aware of a lot of libraries that work with computer science. There's a lot of work with humanities and things like that. But if anyone else knows of a partnership like this, let us know. And again, that difference between design-oriented research and research-oriented design, I think it's got kind of different approaches there, and the partnership has been a really nice melding of those there. And certainly some benefits for the students. We've been able to promote these. The provost has picked up on has expressed a fair bit of interest in this. In terms of the students, they've had an opportunity to work with complex data sources. So the Alma API is quite complex and layered. But the really important thing is that they work on real user problems and they're kind of the experts in that. Like a lot of times we will talk about problems that students encounter, but these are students actually encountering, like they're doing research at the same time as they're designing these interfaces, so they're already familiar with the problem domain and can be working on ideas to fix some of those things. And that allows them to focus on interface design rather than access to data. So working with various APIs can be challenging. And that's where the library can manage the support relationship with the vendor. And I'd just like to give a shout out to Veronica Ramjar, our digital services librarian, as well as Caitlin Backer, our discovery technologies librarian, because they often field these questions that come from the students when we need support. So final takeaways. I think I was talking to this, right? But if you want to add some things in, so the partnerships work well when both parties commit to the collaboration. So we're fully in support of the work happening here. Our library executive team, we're really interested in what's happening there, and certainly our library staff. There's been a few presentations to the public service team, that early one that was very positive, and it's nice to be in the loop on that when we're collecting feedback and things like that. The academic side of the research certainly requires funding. So a lot of these graduate students were funded through Orland's Discovery Grant. So we've got a note here. We had pursued some opportunities for university libraries to provide. We provide in-kind support. Yep, we provide in-kind support. Of course, but there are other opportunities with NSERC and SHRC grants to have nonprofit industry partners. So we actually have a similar grant underway with public libraries, the Saskatchewan Public Library System, because they could be eligible as a research partner there. So this is not product development. I had talked a bit about the skunkworks concept and feeding the ideas coming from the skunkworks back into the center. That path to production is still a long one and requires resourcing. So this is still a lot of academic research, but the prototype development is interesting and important. I think the process we've followed with this as well is, so if we're looking to transfer the knowledge from the academic project, we start with the good academic results in terms of the user testing and things like that, and then we also collect library feedback, and then we proceed from there. Yeah, and just wanted to stress again that path to production, because it has been a lot of work. So
Can I comment on the funding?
absolutely.
So I just want to make one more comment on like kind of the funding of academic research through libraries. It's tricky because again, our library can't be a kind of a sponsor partner for grants because they're part of the university and I'm part of the university, and so we're trying to get grants for doing the research, and so they're ineligible for that kind of partnership, although external organizations are eligible. So this worked because I already had a plan for doing this style of this research, because it's part of what I do for my research. And so one of the big funding kind of models within the sciences is a discovery grant. And so my previous discovery grant and my current discovery grant are both kind of in the context of academic digital library searching. So I was going to do it. Dale made it easier for me, a lot easier, and the access to Alma made it even easier. And so kind of in the early days, I had access to a Google API. It's gone. There was some talk about Google Scholar API. No way. And so the idea is, if you can't get access to data, how do you do research on search interfaces? You start skimming and scraping the pages, and then that's just very risky in terms of running user studies, because what if they change the style of their page right in the middle of a study? So this kind of the funding was important to have already, and then the partnerships kind of came after.
Right, that's it for our talk. The last two slides are just references for online. So some of the research that Orland talked about, as well as the student publications.
All right, thank you very much, guys. That was really exciting. We do have a couple of minutes for questions if people have questions before the break.
Sure.
I certainly have a question. A lot of this advanced searching traditionally, and I was just working with a bunch of graduate students last night on the whole business of citation tracking, the way you move into more advanced, getting at the network of literature that you're looking at is to go look at who cited the paper and what the references are. How have you found that compared to, to the methods of bringing the network together that you guys are using?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think this forward and backward citation analysis is the kind of the academic term of what you're describing. And I think the idea is that it already exists within Primo. And so our idea of kind of, again, integrating our work within existing infrastructure allows us to leverage that. The question then is, once you find something, how do you get it into your workspace? And so I think navigating and finding how you got to that location, and then being able to save that path, that provenance of that particular search result. I got to that through citation analysis versus I got to that because of a specific query. Saving all that information so that we can then allow people to see how you got to good stuff, and then that leads to how you get to other good stuff. And so, yeah, it works. It's integrated, but it's not something we're doing explicitly. Our kind of main contributions are, building good workspaces where people can kind of hold on to their information all at the same time.
Cool. Yeah. Margaret, did you have a question over here?
So my background's in comp sci, UX, and HCI as well. And one of my major takeaways from this conference has been the discussions about accessibility. And I'm just wondering, have any of the talks made you shift your plans in any of your design oriented research at all, for including, I guess, people with different needs in the beginning discovery phase of your research projects?
I was totally predicting a question like this. Yeah, it has changed my way of thinking. I did write a note in my book that we should certainly do an accessibility audit on what the interface is. Anytime you use color encoding to kind of reveal relationships, you run the risk of people not being able to perceive those colors. And so there are some like techniques around managing that. It does limit the ability to it kind of takes that design space and really kind of contracts it quite a bit. And then the question is, do you want to have that like maintained for everybody, or do we create an accessible version of the interface? And I think that's a bit of a kind of a design choice, conceptual choice. And it's something that is on our radar. Yes.
Okay, first of all, thanks for this. I'm always really delighted when the field of information behavior guides what we're doing. We live in the world of information behavior, and it's rarely discussed specifically. So I was really delighted to see you referencing Marcia Bates's work and folks like that, because I think it's so critical that we follow that. So as a result, I did want to mention that most models of information behavior don't actually start with search. They start with need. And that's important because the need will determine whether it's actually the search that you described is what they want. They might want something quite different. And I think we assume that the need immediately draws us towards doing the kind of searching you talked about here. And that's not necessarily the case. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already looked at the work of people like Brenda Dervin or Nick Belkin, they really kind of provide that piece just before the decision to go to a tool that you've been describing. And there's a gap there that I think we all need to recognize, that the target that you've ended up with, which is a perfectly reasonable one, isn't always the target that people are actually looking for. Thank you for that.
That's a very excellent point. And I think, my initial thoughts on that are that Google has trained us to be a search first kind of people. And I think we need to be a think first kind of people and then decide what to do. And I think it comes down to like education. So we didn't talk about this, but Dale and I and a few other librarians at the University of Regina have been working on, developing more training for students on how to be more thoughtful searchers. And so we are thinking of the entire infrastructure. Here we're talking specifically about search, but we understand that search exists within an environment of information and information behavior, not just information seeking behavior, but the bigger information behavior.
Hi, very loud. Thank you so much. That was very interesting. I would love to see the demo, by the way. And one of my questions was about, you mentioned kind of course specific searching, which if I think back as a student, like that would be really smart for me to have had, like access to a way to kind of segment out the searches that I was conducting for a specific course, specific assignment. So can you speak to how you kind of tackled that? You mentioned it briefly, but I wasn't really sure where you went with that in terms of Alma and Primo.
Sure, yeah, I can do that. So when you start a search in our interface, you can either resume a previous search task, or you can just issue a query at the top, and it then generates a task based on that very first query that you issue. And then you can change it as your kind of understanding of it changes. And so then every other search from that point forward is in the context of that specific task. And so so we have an extra layer. But the layer is, we tried to make it as streamlined of a layer as possible. But I think keeping track of those things is important. And then some of the other things we started to think about as soon as we deployed was, well, wouldn't that be great if I could then take this searching that I'm doing as a supervisor and give it to my students? Here's a starting point of a search, a body of search, not just the documents, but how I found them. And because we're trying to train our grad students and our senior undergrad students, not just to have information, but how to get information. And so that ability to kind of then package up a search activity that I did in a task and give it to somebody else. And then we extended that to, well, what if the librarians who are training students on how to do good searching, instead of just watching them follow through on some search activities, they could again package up that search activity and give it to the students so that they could replay these searching at their leisure at home when they need to kind of do their own refresher. So they don't have to go back into the library and use librarian time to kind of do things that they could do on their own. And so we can make things more efficient for the librarians, and then they can spend their time on other like big picture things instead of so much kind of that low level repeat help. I'm pretty sure as an instructor, I know that repeating myself when I'm teaching something is okay, but at some point it becomes like a little bit of extra work. And I could imagine a similar thing happens when librarians are trying to teach students how to search, and then they keep on coming back and you're having to kind of re-show them over and over. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just give it to them?
I'll also just mention too that there are possibilities here for evidence synthesis, systematic review activities, because that's something where you do need to keep track of your search results or search history very carefully. And so we talked about this to someone else, and they had mentioned that as a definite potential for it as well. So
Really excellent. Thank you, Orland and Dale. And with that, we have arrived at the next coffee break. So we'll see everybody back here at 11 o'clock. Thank you very much.